Joining me now to discuss the impact of all this is Amol Rajan, the editor of the Independent newspaper, and Emily Ashton, a political correspondent at BuzzFeed. Emily, let's start with you, if we may, and get a quick flavour of how social media and the internet was responding to the debate as it unfolded.
I was going to say it's hard to follow that. I hope we have more to agree on this. I mean, social media, when we were following it ahead of the debate, which we're calling a debate even though it was a bit of a non-debate, wasn't it? Battle for number 10 wasn't really much of a battle in the end. They had their own separate stints on the TV. The anticipation was building, wasn't it, on the channel? But social media was thinking, is this going to be a bit of a damp squib?
And once it got underway?
And once it got underway, I think people started talking about Cameron's nerves more than anything. I mean, he had the short straw, really, because he had to go in cold and he had to talk to Jeremy Paxman before actually going to the audience and having the easier ride and getting those nice questions.
It certainly got it off to a good start. That was the thing. The fact that, I mean, I know he didn't want it to end up like that, and obviously Jeremy Paxman's career has plunged since he left his show to terrible new depths, but he did start with two very smart questions. The fact that Cameron couldn't say on the food banks how many food banks there were, how many people were suffering from it. He asked a question about 0 hours contracts, which is a bit ridiculous because Jeremy Paxman presumably couldn't live on a 0 hours contract. And he asked this thing about, do you know how much the borrowing has gone up by, or how much your government has borrowed? And those were three questions that Cameron wasn't able to give a direct answer to, which meant that it started off in a fantastically engaging way. It is completely and utterly ridiculous, by the way, that all of us wanted to watch hours and hours of Cameron getting grilled. He had a very easy time with the audience, which is when it all sort of stopped and social media kind of died down a bit. But in the early bit against Paxo, it was riveting. It
was, and yet the Labour narrative is supposed to be all about the NHS. The Conservative narrative is supposed to be all about the economy, Emily. Which of them would have come out of those encounters feeling best pleased that they got their message on the table?
I think Cameron's kind of Q&A with the audience, it just seemed a bit by the end like a party political broadcast. He just kept wheeling out these lines that you could easily see in press releases.
But in terms of the broader campaign, who do you think had a better night?
I don't know. I mean, I think both of them struggled a bit and had to defend their record a little. I think Ed Miliband came across a little bit more easily in terms of a political leader. I think people saw a different side to him, and he's probably got more to be pleased about with the evening.
But do you understand why there hasn't been a head-to-head debate?
Well, I can see David Cameron's reasons for not wanting one.
Can you see them more clearly now than you could before?
Yeah, and I think most people will be able to see that, and I think that was what David Cameron was worrying about. By putting Ed Miliband on the same platform, people would be able to see him more easily in number 10, perhaps.
Amol Rajan, did you learn anything tonight?
Not particularly. I mean, we knew that the Prime Minister's a coward, but he's a coward for tactical reasons. I mean, it doesn't make sense if you're David Cameron. It's all kind of downside, to use a sort of jargonistic way. There's no point in going up against Ed Miliband, because Ed Miliband's going to come out on top. So he's taken the risk of looking a bit silly, and it is obviously, as your question to Liz Truss hinted at, it's obviously completely absurd that they're in the same place but won't go head-to-head. In terms of who won the debate, I think Allegra is a bit tough on Cameron in saying that he showed no sort of emotional honesty. I think there was a moment with the audience questions where he's very effective at that sort of stuff. You know, you've got to remember he was an effective PR before he was an effective PM. And there's a moment where he talked about his son Ivan, he talked about the NHS, which I thought was quite emotionally, sort of made himself emotionally available and quite effective. But the reason that I think lots of people on social media and certain people within the media class will call it for Ed Miliband is because the expectations of him were so low. What Miliband had to do today was sort out the fact that he doesn't look prime ministerial to most people, sort out the fact that he's weak on the economy, show a bit of humour and not screw up. And he did most of those things. I think a lot of us are pleasantly surprised, and it's credit to him because, you know, it's a scary thing to do. He's practised incredibly hard, done a lot of preparation, and he didn't disappoint. So I think of the two parties, I think Labour will be slightly more pleased, but that's because they had lower expectations to begin with.
But BuzzFeed's readership, rather younger than the average newspaper's readership. Although I was about to say, give me a chance, although the Independent's demographics are pretty youthful too. What would younger voters feel about an evening like tonight, do you think? Because it was strange, wasn't it?
It was, and, you know, we try and kind of get the quirky takes on, and we were putting these vines on. At one point it sounded like somebody in the audience was called Zayn Malik, and somebody thought the One Direction star was in the audience. That was all very exciting.
Well, he's free tonight.
He is at a loose end.
Maybe he is, yeah. But, you know, I think a lot of people would just generally be interested in the two leaders coming in and having that debate. People love a TV spectacle, don't they?
Do they, Amal? Do normal people love these spectacles?
They like combat, and I think when it was combative today, I mean, even with Miliband, when he was having the town hall questioning, there were a couple of personal digs about his brother and about what was his failings. He mentioned bacon sandwich. They like a bit of competition, sort of opposition. I think what the blandest and most boring and tedious bit of tonight was when Cameron was basically given the audience. There was no interrogation. He was basically given a free platform to really do a party political broadcast, and I think that was really boring. But the bit of it where it was properly interrogative was good for democracy, and I think even if it doesn't move the dial hugely, it's interesting that if we think social media is calling it for Miliband and Guardian Poll's calling it for Cameron, even if it doesn't move the dial, people are talking about politics, and we're 6 weeks away from what's going to be a massive constitutional crisis in this country. We could have 2 elections in the space of the next 6 months. It's good that people are talking about politics.
Amal Rajan, Emily Ashton, many thanks indeed.